This week on Inside Scoop, Los Angeles riots seal the Democrats' leftward lurch on immigration. Vermont may no longer be Bernie Sanders territory anymore. And Donald Trump throws open the doors of the White House to evangelical Christians. Welcome to Inside Scoop, where we talk about all the news that's fit to print in the Washington Examiner magazine. I'm Jim Antle, your host. And in this week's issue, we talk about, are the Los Angeles riots sealing the leftward shift of the Democrats on immigration? In LA, we've seen people come out to protest the ICE facilities, the Immigration Enforcement Agency, as they're conducting raids to deport illegal immigrants. This is part of the mass deportations campaign that President Trump promised in his second term. Local Democrats have been opposed to the raids, and many people have taken to the streets. The protests have often turned violent, and the riots have resulted in President Trump calling in the National Guard and calling in active duty troops to quell them and try to keep the peace. This hasn't sat well with local Democratic leaders, especially California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our founding fathers' historic project, 3 co-equal branches of independent government. There are no longer any checks and balances. Congress is nowhere to be found.
Newsom had previously been trying to pivot to the center on a whole host of issues. He'd been hosting a podcast in which he talked to people like Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk, who are big in the MAGA movement and represent a different political perspective from the California governor. Newsom is widely viewed as a 2028 Democratic presidential contender. Therefore, his decision to throw in with the rioters and lurch to the left on immigration is noteworthy. The fact that these protests have turned violent and that they're directed toward ICE may position Democrats as being against immigration enforcement and potentially law enforcement in general, reminiscent of the 2020 George Floyd riots. However, Newsom isn't alone among California Democrats. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass feels basically the same way.
The disruption and the fear that has been caused by the raids has really had a devastating effect and has been a body blow to our economy. I don't think the president understands that we have entire sectors of our economy that cannot function without immigrant labor.
Immigration was one of the big issues that turned the 2024 presidential election in Trump's favor. The 4 years of the border being virtually open under former President Joe Biden caused public attitudes on immigration to harden to the point where things like mass deportations polled much better. But obviously some illegal immigrants, because they're busboys, seamstresses, people who've been in the country a long time, might on an individual basis be sympathetic figures. However, Democrats have focused on people who have been suspected of ties to MS-13 and criminal activities beyond illegal immigration when trying to find sort of poster children for mistaken deportations by the Trump administration. It isn't really very clear that Democrats have learned the lessons of the 2024 presidential election, especially as it relates to the issue of immigration. And it isn't clear that the Democratic base is really on the broader electorate's side when it comes to this issue. What do you think? Let us know down below. And in this week's issue, we had a story looking at whether Vermont is really still Bernie Sanders territory anymore. Joining me today is magazine managing editor David Mark. And David, you went out to Vermont and you've explored the trajectory of the Vermont state's politics. Are we seeing a little bit of a rightward movement?
Yeah, it's interesting. You think of Vermont as far left. Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent senator for a long time, 2-time Democratic presidential candidate. Ben and Jerry's, a sort of hippie-ish social justice type ice cream entrepreneurs, and just a general reputation as a kind of hippie state. But interestingly, Vermont, at least in legislative elections in 2024, had the biggest rightward shift. Republicans won the most seats proportionally of any state in the country, which is what got me interested in this whole topic.
Mm-hmm. And so, Vermont historically was a Republican state.
Yeah.
But then once it made the shift to the left, it really made it dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that Vermont is going to, say, become the new Alabama anytime soon. It's still, you might say, a solidly center-left, even more than a little bit more than center-left. But there's some real concerns up there. What I gathered is people are really concerned about tax increases. It's expensive everywhere. Inflation is kicking in on grocery prices. Also, property taxes are up way high there. Also, just some of the social initiatives that have gone on, like there's a drug rehabilitation center funded by the state that was put right in the middle of downtown Burlington, which is where all the businesses are, where a lot of the tourists flock to, and not surprisingly, it drove away a lot of businesses there. So just those kind of social issues that we hear about elsewhere, I think really get concentrated in a small population state like that.
And of course, they've had a popular Republican governor, maybe not the most conservative Republican governor, but certainly popular, starting maybe to get some legislative reinforcements.
Yeah, it's one of those funny situations where it was, for a little while, a few years, it was Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maryland, three of the deepest blue Democratic states in the country, actually had Republican governors. They've now reverted more Democratic in Massachusetts and Maryland.
Right.
But in Vermont, they've had a Republican governor for going on a decade now. And now he has enough support in the legislature among fellow Republicans that they can sustain vetoes. Basically forces Democrats to have to deal with Governor Phil Scott, the Republican. Previously, they could basically override him when they wanted to. Last year, in the April through June 2024 session, Democrats overrode 6 out of 8 vetoes, but that's gone now.
But there's no real indication that Vermont's going to become competitive for Republicans at the federal level.
No, it's not MAGA or anything remotely like that. And while Bernie Sanders, actually his vote total was somewhat down in 2024, he still won by almost 2-1, but he scored up in the 70s and 80s before. The other congressional representative, Senator Peter Welch, and the House member Becca Balin, both are Democrats, pretty strongly far left Trump critics. So the federal level is still tough, but I think this is sort of a model for Republicans, or you might say minority parties everywhere. You can make some inroads, at least at the state level, and block some of the more extreme things from happening.
Taxes can be a pretty big issue even in a blue state.
Well, absolutely. It's a motivating issue. And there's another element of Vermont is sort of its whole structure of economic ideas is starting to catch up with it. After several decades, they basically got along decently with just kind of big government liberalism, if you want to call it that, for decades. There wasn't much development allowed. Environmental issues were a high priority. And you compare that to like next door in New Hampshire, which has much more of a libertarian sense about it. No sales tax, no state income tax.
Right.
Businesses can largely do what they want. But now it's really, decades later, really led to economic stagnation in Vermont. And that's also something I was hearing is even dairy farmers, small business owners, they're like, yeah, our kids are going away. I was at a very nice restaurant in Burlington, had a nice conversation with the bartender, University of Vermont business student, saying, yeah, this is where I'm from, and I love my family and everything, but there's no opportunities here. I'm getting out of here, either going to New York or Boston or somewhere else as soon as I graduate.
Maybe Florida.
It's a lot warmer down there, at least during the winter as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
If you're following us on YouTube, you can read David's story by clicking here on the digital magazine. In America, religious revivals are nothing new, but this one feels different. Our Amy DeLaura explains how the Trump White House is throwing open its doors to evangelical Christians.
We need God, we want God, and with His help, we will make our nation stronger, safer, greater, and more prosperous, and much more united than ever before.
Trump has leaned hard into faith, transforming the White House into a beacon for evangelical Christians and a stage for a broader religious resurgence sweeping America. It's a strange scene for some to see. the thrice-married, casino-building reality TV star who once fumbled the pronunciation of a book in the Bible.
2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians.
But Trump's administration is doubling down on God. Add this to the seismic shock of the first ever American Pope ascending to the Vatican throne, and you've got a moment that could reshape religion in America for generations. Pew Research Center reports while Christian identification had dipped from 78% in 2007 to 63% in 2024, the decline has now started to slow, and among younger people, there's a surprising uptick in spiritual curiosity. Some call it a reaction to a secularizing culture. Others see it as backlash against woke ideologies. Whatever the cause, Trump has seized the moment, positioning himself as the high priest of this revival. Trump took to Truth Social, his digital pulpit, declaring, "We are together going to make America bigger, better, stronger, wealthier, healthier, and more religious than it has ever been before." For a man who rarely darkened a church door in his first term, Trump has a newfound comfort with religious rhetoric. Trump's religious evolution is one of the more improbable arcs of his career. Raised Presbyterian, Trump claimed he identifies as a non-denominational Christian in 2020. His biographers insist he's never been spiritually or religiously serious person. Yet something shifted after surviving an assassination attempt in July 2024.
I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
Whether it's genuine conviction or political calculus, Trump's rhetoric resonates with a base that sees him as divinely appointed. Polls show 82% of white evangelical Protestants backed him in 2024, along with 58% of white non-evangelical Protestants and 61% of white Catholics. His critics, though, see a transactional faith. When Episcopal Bishop Mary Ann Budde called for mercy towards immigrants in the LGBT community at Trump's inaugural prayer service,
"In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now."
he dismissed her as a, quote, so-called bishop and a radical left hardline Trump hater. Critics claim Trump's faith seems less about theology and more about power. Nowhere was this power on display more than during the White House's 2025 Easter celebration.
We're bringing religion back in America. We're bringing a lot of things back, but religion is coming back to America.
Gone were the subdued egg rolls of the Biden era. Trump's team turned Holy Week into a spectacle with live-streamed prayer service, worship events, and a lavish dinner attended by evangelical heavyweights. The contrast with former President Joe Biden's past Easter celebrations, overshadowed by Transgender Day of Visibility and topless influencers, was stark.
Are we topless at the White House?
Evangelicals, still stinging from that perceived slight, saw Trump's celebration as a triumphant reclamation of Christianity. So what does this mean for religion in America? Well, the message is clear. Faith is back. And Trump's faith-based agenda, paired with the historic rise of an American pope, could spark a spiritual renaissance, uniting conservative Christians, evangelical, and Catholic in a shared mission to restore traditional values. I'm Amy DeLaura for Washington Examiner.
Thank you, Amy. You can read Amy's story and all the articles we've talked about in today's show in the Washington Examiner magazine. I'm Jim Antle. This has been your Inside Scoop. We'll catch you next time.